Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Sponge Chat. My name is Jim. I am the author of Sponge ELT, and I'll be presenting to you a very special guest today, Emma Heyderman. Emma is a very, very well-established materials writer, coursebook writer. I am fairly confident that most of us have worked with some of her materials before. But she's also a teacher trainer. She's an academic manager of quite a large school within Spain. And it was really interesting to get her insights into materials writing, but not only the act of materials writing. We looked at something that we hadn't spoken before. We're going through the whole process of perhaps some of the perspectives of the people involved, some of their experience, some of the obligations of both the coursebook writer and perhaps editors. And so we got a very in-depth view of materials writing, which is something that for me I had no idea about and very little experience with. Hopefully this brings some lovely pieces of information and advice to teachers around the world. And if you're looking to move into materials writing, I'm sure you'll find some of it really, really interesting. Emma did give us some advice for those teachers looking to make those moves. She also gave us some brilliant book recommendations, which I'll put down in the blog and links there. Enjoy this one. I think this one's going to be really, really information heavy. Lots of great stuff in here, and keep watching. Thank you very much for all of your responses so far. I have a few more lined up for the remainder of this academic year, and then I'll take a break off in August, and then we'll keep going through. Okay, so thank you very much for your love and support. Keep it up, and I'll see you for future Sponge Chats. Okay, bye. Hi Emma, how are you?
Hi Jim, I'm fine. How are you? You hot?
Yeah, very, very hot at the moment in Zaragoza. I imagine in San Sebastian it's a little bit cooler than here.
Yes. And we've got the sea, which you haven't got.
Yeah. Can't have everything, right?
Well,
but no. Emma, I just want to say thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I believe this is the 10th Sponge Chat so far, and we've had an amazing reaction from teachers around the world so far. But one thing that we are lacking, I suppose, is more insights from materials writers. And you yourself are quite a well-established materials writer, but also a teacher trainer, a director of quite a big institution. So it's going to be lovely to see your opinion on a number of aspects. I suppose before we get into the Sponge Chat, maybe we can look at the purpose of Sponge Chats. So it all started from this idea of, I had some teachers asking me, well, how did you move into teacher training? And I thought it was quite interesting to see the different perspectives from trainers. I imagine yourself, the route that you took to become a materials writer or a teacher trainer is quite different to the route that other trainers have taken. And I suppose what I'd like to do is present teachers from around the world in different contexts, ideas on how they can progress within ELT, so that one, they stay within ELT. Because I feel that sometimes teachers feel that it's quite a closed career, and maybe there's not much support in their local context and they feel that that's it. So I'm trying to help teachers notice that there is more out there. And hopefully we can keep teachers in and really, really increase the professionalism within our industry. That's Sponge Chats in a nutshell. So thank you very much for being here. So let's shift to Emma. Who is Emma? This is the question. Who is Emma?
Well, that's me. So where did I begin? I've probably got the traditional story of finishing university, I did a degree in psychology, and
Wow.
I knew I wanted to stay in psychology, and I thought I wanted to be an educational psychologist. And I went to talk to someone, and they said, hey, you should really get experience in teaching. And this was back in London, and I thought, London, teaching in London is not what I want to do. And somebody said, well, why don't you do a CELTA? So there I was, I did my CELTA in London, and I went down to International House and said, hey, I've got my CELTA, I've got a B. I was very young at the time, and they said, well, how about San Sebastian? And I said, San Sebastian, now where's that? I mean, I had no idea. And they said, well, it's in Spain. So I ended up in San Sebastian. I took the train overnight, came down through France. I remember there was a woman on the train who said to me, you can't go to Spain, you don't speak Spanish. Anyway, I ended up in Spain. And I realized here I was in San Sebastian. It was Spain, but the locals thought they were in the Basque Country.
Right.
They thought, you know, it's somewhere different. And I was in an international house school, and I started. I was very, very green, very new. I was thrown into class, but you know what? I think from probably the get-go, I loved it. I just thought, oh, this is great. I really, really like this. And after a couple of years, it kind of got to crunch time. You know, what do I do now? Do I stay here or do I move on? And I really liked San Sebastian.
Yeah.
I have to say that I'd met my partner then. So I just thought, well, I'll stay.
Right.
And then I took the typical route. You get a little bit more experience. You try and teach everything. So you teach a bit of adult. I was still an adult teacher. I didn't want to go anywhere near children or adolescents. I just wanted to teach adults. I did my Delta and got my Delta. And then it's like, okay. And it's a bit like what you were saying. So now what? You know, I'm an experienced teacher. I've got the Delta. I can teach exams. I was a Cambridge examiner. And a job came up. Our school is, the school I work in is enormous. I mean, we've got something like 6,000 students, 11 different branches, and a new school opened in one of the neighborhoods with kids. And someone said, well, there's a job going there for a senior teacher. Why don't you apply? And I said, yeah, but I hate kids. You know, I'm not going there. But anyway, off I went and I applied for the job, and I didn't tell them I didn't like kids, but you know what? Teaching kids when you're suddenly experienced and you're a confident teacher was actually much, much easier than I thought. And I loved it because suddenly all that management that you've been working on for years and years and that kind of confidence, once you've got that, you just transfer it into the kids' classroom. Yeah. And I just thought, oh, kids, this is for me. I love the kids. I love the adolescents. And we went on. So my next job was young learner coordinator. We were just beginning with 6-year-olds, and a lot of the teachers were like, ooh, can't teach kids. So there I was helping the teachers with the very young kids, developing, getting into routines. And I was also choosing course book materials for all the different levels. So what happened next was we were using a book called Objective Pet, and it must have been the most unpopular book we'd ever used. People used to call it Objectionable Pet. Sorry, I shouldn't say this, the poor authors. And the rep said to me, do you know what? We're looking for somebody to review the book. Would you do it? And I said, well, I guess I will. So I wrote the review. I was paid nothing to do it. I spent hours, I must have spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks writing this perfect report where I put in everything that should change. And I even said, exercise 2, page 52, don't do it this way, do it that way. I sent off my report, and 1 month later, the editor got back to me and said, hey, do you want to write a book? And at that point, they were working on a new series, Cambridge, and that was Complete Pet. Mm. That was my break. I wrote my sample, and they said, we can tell you've never written before. And I said, well, no. They said, well, can you write it again? Here's what we'd like you to do. And off I went. I wrote it again. And they said, okay, we think you can do it, but we'd like you to do it with Peter May. Now, Peter May is this sort of experience. He's written, Proficiency Masterclass. He's written, he's almost one of the TEFL superstars. And he is such a nice chap. You know, he was probably the nicest person you ever would like to work for. And he kind of took me under his wing and just kind of was very gentle and just said, well, Emma, why don't you do it this way? And Emma, what I suggest you do is this. And in a bit, I can tell you all the advice he gave me. And off we went, and we wrote this thing together. And it took us, I don't know, about 8 months. We did it for royalties. And, you know, I've never looked back. And that's been my best-selling book. That book just, you know, it went around the world and sold thousands and thousands. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. You've gone from someone, you know, the more traditional approach, I suppose. I get some experience in teaching, staying away from kids,
Yes.
and then perhaps falling in love with that sort of dynamic, and then actually creating materials for that dynamic as well. That's a really, really interesting journey. And it sounds like that moving into materials writing, that you were given that support, or at least you were working with someone that could support you. And that seems like it was quite a fundamental aspect of that development. Which seems to be a common theme in many of the chats I'm having. It seems to be that there needs to be some kind of element of support there in order to make that move successfully, I suppose. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think my case was unusual in the fact that I think normally publishers would ask you to write resource materials first. So they would set you off with some worksheets. Then they might get you to do some exams. Then they'd get you working on the teacher's book. And then you'd write a workbook. And finally, you'd be on the student's book.
Okay.
I think in my case, I was very, very lucky. I think at that time, Cambridge were very short of writers, and they had Peter May in place, but he didn't want to write the full book. I think he wanted somebody to work with him. And I think I was just incredibly lucky. I think anybody new starting off, don't think that you'll just fall straight into a student's book. And there's quite a lot of boring stuff out there to do. I don't know if you've had experience doing some of this boring stuff.
No, my experience, I suppose, within NEOT is really teaching and training. And now I've just moved into kind of assistant director's position, director of studies position. So moving into management as well now. But it's I suppose as a teacher, you're always looking at, like, I develop a lot of my own materials. I wouldn't say that I'm at the level of confidence of saying, being able to make explicit all of my sort of underlying beliefs about my selection of materials. I think I'm almost there, but I still think that's something I'm working on. But in terms of creating stuff like to be published, definitely not. I haven't done any of that.
Right. Well, it's interesting what you said, because a lot of people have said that to me, but I don't know why yet, why I'm creating materials, or I don't know what my underlying belief is. But actually, my experience nowadays, more than, sort of 10 years ago, is publishers have their own underlying beliefs and they tell you what to do. And I think if you go to a publisher and say, my underlying belief is this, you could put them off. I think you can take a brief and you can slightly change it, and you can say, maybe if we do things slightly this way, it could work. But I think for you to go to a publisher and say, my underlying belief is that everything should be done through stories, I don't think they're going to listen to you, which is slightly sad. That I think it's getting more and more straitjacketed.
Interesting. So I don't know much about the materials writing process, only from what I've heard from these fund chats. So it seems like teachers are noticed by publishers either through their blogs or at conferences and things like this. And so the publishers already have in their mind what they want. Is that correct? And then
yes.
So that's interesting.
I mean, the typical thing, I think the publishers get hold of a list of people. The publishers have a project. They sit down together and they decide, what it's going to be, what level it's for, what the underlying theory is, what are the components, what are the digital parts. And once they've decided on that, they then write a brief. After that, they get a list of authors. And I don't know, for one project, maybe they have 6 or 7 people, and they send out the brief, and everybody then goes away and writes to the brief. You're allowed a little bit of flexibility, and they certainly say if there's something you don't like about the brief, put it in. But generally, it's fairly constrained. So off you go. You write your sample. It goes to the publisher, and I think the publisher are looking for 2 things. One is, are you able to follow the brief? But I think they're also looking for creativity, people with new ideas. I mean, the latest project I'm working on at the moment, I notice there are a lot of very new authors, and I think because the whole project is a kind of new angle on something, and they're looking for some people who haven't done things before and are coming in with new ideas. So I think if you're new to writing, so say you're a teacher and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to get into writing, but I'm not there yet, don't worry. Maybe a publisher will then team you up with somebody who is.
So that's really interesting. I suppose in one way, as you said before, maybe as you become quite an experienced materials writer, maybe the straitjacket becomes a little bit too restrictive. But as a new writer, it's kind of almost a guideline, and then it kind of sets you on the right, your left and right of arc, so to speak, where you can and can't go. And that's kind of supportive, I would imagine, in at the starting out phase.
Yes, definitely.
I suppose the good and bad of it, right? The good and bad.
Yes. I mean, projects I've worked on. When I started one project, we had very few guidelines. We were just told 8 units. You propose the grammar. You propose the topics. And that's hard. I mean, sitting down and thinking, well, unit 1, what do I do in unit 1? What language do I put in? That is quite a hard place to start. But what I found is nowadays the editors do it for you. So you're told unit 1, present simple, and the topic vocabulary is family. Off you go.
Is there?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I was going to ask, and I'm looking to actually have some of these sponge chats with editors in language teaching, because obviously it's not only teaching. The teachers that we can consider as EOT professionals, as writers, editors, and so on. Is there, so for editors, are they people that have come from a methodological background or pedagogic background, or are they, so the people, the editors that you've worked with generally, are they ex-teachers per se, or how does that work?
That's an interesting question, and it's a question I asked. Why do some people become authors and some people become editors?
Right.
I mean, so I asked, and a lot of them are teachers. The people working in the EFL have been teachers, and I think they tend to be more people who quite like teaching, but they don't want to stay in it. Quite a lot of people who wanted to go back to the UK and didn't want to teach in the UK, but wanted to kind of combine something with the LT with living in Oxford or London. They were the big centres for this kind of stuff. So I think that's it. Editors, I think, tend to be taught for much less time and probably want to go back to the UK or work in some of the big hubs like Madrid. I think there are a lot of editors in Madrid working for the big publishers there.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Cool. That's a lot of information there to digest. You're opening up the ins and outs. Intriguing to see this sort of what's behind the course book.
Yeah.
So I suppose let's have a look at your motivations, because obviously you're a well-established teacher trainer as well, and you've been in academic management for quite some time. But what were your, so your I imagine your initial motivations were based on sort of someone offering you to write their material. But what were your motivations to continue in materials writing? Is it something that you enjoyed? Is it something that you found was transferable to your context, or why did you continue to stay in materials writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, before I was offered this work, I did enjoy creating materials. And I think, going back to my question at the beginning, who becomes an editor and who becomes a writer? I think the writers are those of us who are constantly creating new things. I mean, I'm not somebody who can pick up a course book and teach from it. I always have to do something completely different with it. So I do that anyway. I spend so much time doing the same exercise, but in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's my motivation. It's creative. When you go off and you think of a new idea for a reading text, I mean, if I give you an example, you can only use the verb be, and you've got to create a wow text about the family. And it can't be anything ever done before. So it can't be about a family with lots of brothers and sisters. It can't be about, and that's creative. You then spend hours and hours. So what could be new? A family, and I can only use to be. So that's creative. And then you have to kind of craft the text, low level. You can't use any words that are above A1.
Yeah.
And all of that I find I really enjoy. And I think that's my motivation. I enjoy the kind of creative side to it. And then when you finally, at the end of the afternoon, you think, oh, I did that. I managed that. That's great.
Nice. Yeah. I imagine also seeing your work, come to fruition at the end of it, putting all that hours, and I imagine it must be hours, days, weeks, perhaps even months of work in.
Months, yeah.
And I imagine there's I was speaking to Lindsay Warwick, and she was saying, when you send off your first draft, just be prepared for it to come back with lots of notes.
Yes.
So I imagine there's quite a rigorous editorial process that goes into that as well.
Yes. And that's something you learn to really like. I mean, it's like, sometimes you create materials for the classroom, but nobody will actually tell you what they were like or not. I mean, the students might look at you and kind of go, oh, that was quite good, or that was boring. But the thing about an editor is they'll actually pick up on what's working well, what isn't working. They'll make suggestions. And at the beginning, it's daunting, like Lindsay says, but in the end, that's really nice having, this kind of person looking at everything you do and helping you make it even better. That's great too.
Yeah. So in terms of time commitment, it's just a question that's come up to me now. People that are looking to or considering to write materials for a publisher, how much time would they be expected to really commit to that? Okay.
That's a brilliant question. And this is something you've got to think about. In fact, somebody wrote to me, a couple of weeks ago to say, what should I do? I mean, you need to think about how much time have you got? What are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day? Is that healthy? If you say, no, I can't do that, I'm going to work 5 days a week, but then you've got to begin to think, but how much money do I need to live on? I mean, that's another consideration. So it's kind of getting that balance right. I mean, one piece of advice I would say is if you can, continue teaching, because it's the kind of teaching that will get you out into the classroom, get you trying out your materials. I think probably the ideal balance would be something like 10 hours of teaching a week. And then maybe dedicating about 20 hours a week to writing. I don't think you'll be writing all the time because that's impossible. What I tend to do is I'll sit down in the morning and I'll work for about 2 hours and then I'll put it down. I'll go for a walk around the house and then suddenly a new idea will come. You'll be walking down the road and suddenly you'll think, oh, I'll do it that way. And you run home and you do it that way. So I think it works a bit like that. But I definitely would say, certainly at the beginning, don't give up the teaching. You need to be going back into the classroom, trying things out. Well, does that work? Can I do it that way?
Yeah, that seems like the logical, I mean, and I'm sure there are many coursebook writers that are very good that aren't teaching anymore, of course. But it almost seems like, obviously we know that coursebooks perhaps are written for a general context most of the time. But still, we want to be able to know that our activities are working, no? Like even
yes.
now, I create materials, and I know that for this class that they're going to work, or that I do them, and the next time I do them, I'm always changing them a little bit, because you've seen them in practice. So I think that seems like a good piece of advice there, to always almost be teaching a little bit, so that you can try them out, or have people that you can get to try them. I suppose I'm not sure if you're allowed to do that.
Yes, no, you can. Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful with that. And it's funny because you do have to ask for permission. I mean, that's something to be quite careful about.
Right.
Depends on your contract. But if you're creating material for a publisher, if it's not your material, if you're writing it for a fee, then you have to ask the publisher if you can use it in your own classes, which is quite weird.
Yeah. So certain things to take into consideration there.
Absolutely. Another thing you can do is, last year, for example, I was academic director and I couldn't teach. It was just impossible to be academic director, carry on writing and teach at the same time. I couldn't do it. So what I did was I taught in the summer. So that's another way around it. So you do a summer school instead.
Yeah. No, I can definitely. That would have been crazy if you were doing academic management, teaching and writing. That's an insane amount of work.
Yes. And that's something to watch. Watch the insane amount of work. It's very easy to say yes. Do 20 hours of teaching. Don't forget, you've got to prepare your classes. You've got to mark any work. So it's not 20 hours teaching, and then take on 20 hours of writing on top of that a week. No, you've got to look after yourself as well. If you don't look after yourself, you can't do it.
No, that's really, really important, I think. And also it's important for like schools, I think, that provide the right support for teachers that are doing that. One more question before we get into the challenges and whatnot, is your perspective on course books. I didn't actually I didn't ask this question. I spoke to Teresa Biswick and Lindsay Warwick, but I didn't actually ask them the question of how does a materials writer view the course book? So for example, if we're looking at the old sort of metaphors of course book, is it a tool? Is it a syllabus? Is it the Bible? Sort of thing. How does a materials writer, because you said that you often exploit coursebook materials, so how do you view your course books or course books that you use now?
Yes, I mean, I think there's a kind of continuum, isn't there? I mean, I don't use a course book at all. There are some people like that who prefer just to go into class and do their own thing and whatever. I would say, me as a writer, I see a course book really as a kind of resource. It provides me with the kind of skeleton. So this is the journey. This is where we're going. This is what we're going to try and achieve. But I will just take the activities. The activities for me are probably the reinforcement at the end. Right. So, for example, if there is an exercise on a certain set of vocabulary, I'll often do the vocabulary in my own way. So I'll work on the vocabulary with the students, but whatever the exercise is or the reading text, that will be something we do it at the end as a kind of follow-up. So I would say, in my case, it's definitely a tool. But then at the other end of the continuum, there are definitely teachers who see the coursebook as their master, meaning I will start on page 1 and I'm going to go to page 100. And interestingly, we worked with a new school where I was doing some training, and I said, well, before I start training, I'm going to observe you. And I went into class, and literally this is what was happening. The teacher would say student A, and the student would read out the question, work in pairs, answer these questions, and then they would do exactly what it said on the page. It was quite amazing. And I said to the teacher afterwards, I said, well, couldn't you have just told the students to get on with it? What did you actually do in the classroom? What was your role? And the role of the teacher basically was just to tell them what page to do and what to do next. So it was a kind of sort of coursebook page turner.
Yeah. It's difficult, no?
Yes.
I mean, I myself view it very similar to yourself. So the coursebook is a tool. And I think in terms of, especially with new teachers, I think the coursebook is a very, very important resource because it provides them with the support they need in order to, move effectively through their classes with a little bit of support and not always have someone there guiding them. At the same time, I think they need support in how to use a course book effectively. And looking at the ideas of metaphors, how are we looking at the course book now? And of course, I suppose it's a matter of experience, teaching knowledge, this sort of stuff. So it's a difficult question, and it's very different for every teacher, I suppose.
It is. And I don't know, because you're probably quite similar to me, but we can probably look at an exercise and think immediately, I know what I'm going to do for that. Whereas there are teachers who don't find that easy. They don't find it easy to look at an exercise and think, how would I do it in a different way? And in fact, teachers have said to me, where do you get your ideas from?
Yeah.
And I just guess we are very, very different people. And, you know, I'm not taking away the fact that this person's probably a very good teacher and has very different skills to me and does things very, very well in different ways. But I think it's a certain type of person, isn't it, who's able to, that kind of creative person.
Yeah, an activity that I like to do with teachers is to take a number of coursebook activities and get teachers to identify the aim of the activity and the success criteria for learners. It's quite difficult, like even myself, you know, I've been teaching for a number of while, done Delta, that sort of stuff. But taking a coursebook activity, sometimes you think, what are we actually looking at here? Can be quite difficult. But I think it's good to do sometimes.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that, and I like your second stage. You know, how would I know if my students were successful, and what would that success be? I think that's a really good question as well.
No,
I guess the question is, what are they able to do that they couldn't do before?
Yeah. Important. Some of these, our own principles to keep in mind as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So obviously we've been speaking about sort of the process and your journey through materials writing. Have there been any major challenge or challenges along the way, and how did you overcome these?
I think there are lots of challenges as well. I think time is a challenge, and we're going back to what we talked about before. So I think people need to be very, very aware of their own time management. How much can you do in a week? Remember to take holidays. That's been a challenge for me. A second challenge, I think, is also some things are going to be fun and creative, and other things are just plain boring. And just being aware that when you come to do the boring, do it to the best of your ability, but just be aware and begin to know what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing. And if you come across something that you don't enjoy doing, one thing I don't particularly enjoy are teachers' books, because I have too much to say. And the editor says to me, you've got to cut 500 words on this page. And I find that really tough. And I said, well, I've just written 3,000 words for that page. And they say, no, it's got to be 1,500. So I know I don't like teachers' books, so I generally say no. So I think it's that. Know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Other challenges that I did come up with, I did think of something as I was speaking, but yeah, it's gone out of my mind. Maybe it will come to me.
If it comes back, let me know. You mentioned the idea... I know,
deadlines. You have to meet deadlines. I mean, they're a challenge, but if you're going to do anything, meet your deadlines. And if you're not going to meet your deadlines, get in contact with your editor and negotiate what you're going to do about it. Never, ever, ever contact your editor the day after a deadline and say, hi, by the way, I haven't finished 2 units. That's a big challenge.
Right. Yeah, Lindsay mentioned the same thing, that it was quite difficult. So it's interesting to see that you're also saying that the deadlines as well are quite an important thing. Something that, I have no experience with in terms of having a deadline to create material for something. Also, we're moving into the editorial process now and the time constraints of the project as a whole, I imagine.
Yes.
And I think, that ties into, if you're going to do this, then understand what your time commitment is going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think my question for an editor, and so when you next have an editor, if you have an editor, what I'd like to know is, what's better, to hand in a piece of work that's not brilliant or to miss a deadline? I mean, that's the question I haven't had answered yet. So if you meet an editor, ask that one on my behalf.
I certainly will. I'll make sure to ask them. You mentioned plain and boring, and then also enjoyable aspects. So for you, you said perhaps the more difficult and plain stuff is the teacher's book. You don't really like that sort of stuff. Is there an aspect of materials writing in general that you really, really enjoy? The part that you're like, okay, this is what I got to do, and I'm going to love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite are students' books. Right. I don't know. I think just because that's the main creative stuff. So if you take your students' book unit, my own working style would be to begin probably with the vocabulary, because I think once you've got the vocabulary and you know what words you're using, everything else kind of falls into place. So you'll probably do, work on the vocabulary, work on the grammar, the language. And then my other favorite page is the writing. I love the writing page because that's something in class that I love doing with students. I love setting up a piece of writing, getting them to experiment, play with words, put it all together, redraft it. So I wonder whether, if you're a writer and you're thinking about what am I going to like, think about your own classroom. What is it that you really, really like about being in the classroom? And maybe that will then become the thing that you really like writing.
Brilliant. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I wonder what that would be for me.
What would you say? Yeah.
I mean, I love, in terms of, I'm mad for task-based language learning. So I really enjoy setting up and looking at the intricacies of tasks. And I've always thought about, I've started writing my own sort of materials for tasks. And I always thought about, I suppose the sort of the input one, that's not just speaking, like the reading and the listening activities, and looking at, for me, I really like looking at the process of listening rather than testing of listening or reading. And so I suppose those would be the types of activities that I like to sort of look at and steal ideas from the internet and create my classes around. So I suppose that would be for me. But I don't know, that's a good question. I don't know what I enjoy most. I need to think about that.
And the great thing about things like listening and reading is that publishers have now realized that it isn't what you said, it isn't just testing, that we have to develop skills. And recently, they're even allowing us coursebook writers to put in more skills development style stuff, not just like one little piddly exercise that is like, look at the pictures, what can you see? No, actually developing something a little bit further. If I'm going to teach these students how to approach difficult words, let me do it properly. And so that's great.
Brilliant. No, I think that's a really, really important thing. And I suppose that by including some of those activities in there, we can also encourage teachers to do them when they're not there as well, which absolutely, which is the thing. I suppose that's another one of the ideas of the metaphors of course books. They're almost I'm not sure how you say that, a model for teachers in the sense of what we'd want them to do in their classroom before an activity, right?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Which is a power, I mean, that's a powerful tool. That's a powerful statement, if you will.
Yes. And if you were going to look at course books and say, okay, if that's our model, which would be your model course book? I mean, I know what mine would be. I mean, if you had to say, this...
I don't know. Recently I've worked with the Open World series. I've also worked with the Complete series, and I like both of them. I think that they set things up in a way that, for a course book, allows teachers and the classrooms to be as quite communicative. Right. I've worked with some course books which I don't think were like that. Right. But for those ones, I think, what would yours be?
So mine would be English file.
Oh, yeah, wow. Classic.
Because it's a classic, and it was written in a way that a new teacher would just pick it up and go bam, 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 bam. And they had everything on that double spread. But there's a problem with English file for someone like me or you, that if you don't do exercise 2, you're stuck. Because you suddenly get to exercise 3 and you realize that the students can't do it because they haven't done exercise 2, because they haven't done the language that. So it's not great for me or you, but for a new teacher, or somebody who, you know, needs that kind of support, I think English file for me would be the model.
Interesting. I wonder what that would be for many teachers.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I have to ask that to some of my teachers and see what they say.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you mentioned that you have a degree in psychology. You did your Celta and you've done your Delta. How, I suppose I want to focus more so on Delta, but also the psychology. How did these, or do these qualifications, these journeys of learning, have they helped you as a materials writer? And if so, in what way?
That's a really good question. And what's really interesting is, so I've reached my position as academic manager, and what's missing from my qualifications is an MA. And I'm now talking to a lot of people with an MA, and I'm thinking, gosh, you know, what right do I have to tell these people how to do things or what to do when I haven't got an MA? So let's go back to your question. I think what the Delta does is it makes you, well, the Celta opens your eyes, and you suddenly realize that teaching is not about how I was taught at school. So it's not about teacher stands at the front and talks to you. It's about students being at the center of their learning, students learn, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But the Celta is also about models. So you're taught PPP and, you know, present, practice, further practice, whatever, production. The Delta, suddenly you're told to forget everything you've learned, you know, start again. But that's wonderful. So you begin to explore things and you begin to think, well, do I really need to begin with presentation at the beginning, or can I do other things? And then you do your Delta. And I think the Delta gives you that kind of confidence because you've passed it and you kind of think, what it's done is it's given me the tools to reflect on what I'm doing. Yeah. So once I'd got the Delta, I kind of thought, okay, I'm just going to use those tools and carry on. And I think at the moment, my own sort of PD journey is just to go to as many webinars or conferences or sessions as I can. I choose very, very carefully. So I choose who I'm going to watch. And I don't just choose, you know, the great masters out there. Sometimes I'll go and choose somebody I've never heard of, just because you can learn so much from everyone else. And I think it's all about reflecting. You know, it's all about, like you were taught in the Delta. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to look at what they're doing, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to decide, is it for me or isn't it for me? Yeah. And I'm also going to try it. You know, maybe my first reaction is, oh, no, but I'm going to try it and see if that works. Yeah. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, no, certainly. I suppose most of the people I've spoken with so far have been teacher trainers, and for trainers like yourself, actually, you know, I think the Delta, it doesn't necessarily need to be the Delta or the Dip TESOL, but I think the Delta is a good way to becoming critical of yourself and being aware of perhaps what good practice is. Yes, because I think that's necessary if you're going to be evaluating teachers at a later stage.
Yes.
But with materials writing, I suppose, and this is a hunch, I suppose the Delta or any sort of diploma level course pushes you to really look at, you know, the underlying principles of certain methodologies, approaches, and maybe analyzing materials and saying, what is this achieving? So I'm supposing that helps set you up to be able to look at a text, whatever it is, and say, okay, I'm going to do this because of this, right?
Yes. And I think it goes back to what I said, is the Delta just makes you a lot more reflective than you've ever been before. It kind of gives you the tools And I think when you lack confidence yourself, it's quite difficult to be reflective. But once you get the Delta and you realize, actually, I'm quite an experienced teacher now, it then allows you to start again from the beginning and start reflecting. Do you know something else as you were talking, I was thinking is really, really good, and that's observing other people. Right. And if you can give them feedback as well, for me, that's incredible, because you go and observe somebody and you think, that's really good. And then you have to think, well, why? Yeah. Why is it working? Why is this successful? Why is the way that they're doing it? Or the opposite, you observe something, you think, don't know, that's not working. And again, why isn't it working? How am I going to kindly explain that to somebody and get them on board? So I think observation and feedback is another great tool for developing, becoming a teacher trainer, and also as a materials writer, because it kind of keeps you being critical, constructively critical, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if there's, so I suppose you were very lucky. I mean, Peter May is, as you know, as you said before, a very, very well established and a well-known name within ELT. And I suppose in a sense, it was kind of, like you said, it took you under a wing, almost like an apprenticeship in a sense.
Yes, definitely, yes.
Is that the general sort of approach now in terms of working with editors? They pair up perhaps less experienced writers with newer writers, and they work together to support like that? Or is it still sort of you're on your own, but we'll give you a little support here and there?
I would say there's a lot of support now, and there's something about, the fact now that we can talk to anyone in any part of the world just makes it all so much easier. What I've found is that we have a lot more conversations. We generally, when I'm working on a project, I'll be talking to the editor and my co-author. I don't think many people write on their own anymore. I think most projects are done with a co-author. As for the pairing, you'll have to ask the editors, but my impression is they tend to pair people with different strengths. For example, I've got a lot of exam experience, so I might be paired with somebody who maybe is a very kind of creative and has lots of new ideas, because I'm a kind of bit old and a bit staid, perhaps. Maybe things would work like that. But you'll have to ask your editor, how do they do those pairings? Do they... But I think it's complements. I think that's what they're looking for, somebody more experienced with certain skills, with somebody maybe less experienced, but with something else.
Right. Okay, it's interesting. I think, like I say, if I was looking to explain that, I'd need that support. And I suppose also just being able to bounce ideas off someone, even if you are the same experience level, that must be quite useful to sort of say, what do you think about this?
Yes. And there's something else very interesting that people ask me is, can you choose your writing partner? I've never been able to.
Right, okay.
But there's Sue Kay, who wrote Inside Out, but she's definitely done more recent things than that. She only writes with Vaughan Jones. Right. She was on Billy CPD, ELT CPD, and something she said was that I only write with Vaughan Jones because we're writing partners.
Writing partners.
So that's interesting. I mean, I've never before been asked, who would you like to write with? It's always been, oh, Emma, here's your writing partner.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be quite amazing, wouldn't it? If you could say, and I'll only do it if I can write with, and who would you choose? There's a question for you.
Oof. I don't know. There's so many good writers out there. I suppose my opinion would probably change if I'd been doing materials writing for some time as well, and
yes.
I had an understanding of sort of the process as well. Interesting question. I have to ask that to more materials writers as I go through.
Yes, we might not want to say it because we're so... But I'd certainly, if you ever have the opportunity and somebody ever says, do you want to write with Peter May? Say yes.
Say yes, right? Say yes.
Say yes. Say yes, world.
Now, also speaking about writing, you've recently started a blog from Teacher to Infinity. What were the motivations behind that? And what are you hoping to achieve from that?
Right. It's interesting because my idea is quite similar to yours. The idea that once you're an ELT teacher, your opportunities are infinite because you have so many skills. So I think I had two reasons. One was just to say to people, we're not just teachers, or we're not just backpackers. No, we're professionals, we're teachers, and we can do so much more. So that was one. And then the second reason was just because, you look around and so many other people were writing blogs, and I thought, gosh, that's something I haven't done. And I think that'd be really useful, just to sit down and begin to think about different areas of things I can do and actually begin to write about it.
Yeah.
And it's been quite an experience because I'm finding it quite tough. It takes time. My promise to myself was I would write a post every Monday, and I've had to stop because these 2 weeks are crazy with finishing courses, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I think if I was going to say to anyone, don't make terrible promises to yourself, keep it. If you're going to write a blog, do it, but don't promise yourself you can do a post every week, because you might not be able to.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. There's a lot more, like even for a short post, some of my short posts that I've done, it takes quite a number of hours to put in there. But I suppose it does get easier as you go on. No, I'm writing an article at the moment and looking at sort of the motivations and some of the benefits, I suppose, of blogging. And I'm looking at two main benefits: the development aspect and the employment aspect. Do you think that blogging has helped you develop in some way, or has it helped you sort of reflect in any way?
Definitely. It's definitely helped me reflect. It's definitely enabled me. And again, we go back to this idea of reflecting. I mean, that's really good to think back. So why? I mean, I haven't done that many posts, but I've written a bit about why I got into young learner teaching. And it really made me think about, well, why did I? And why did I not resist? Why did I in the end give in to it? And what do I like about it? So I think, yes, as a developmental tool, it's very powerful. It's a bit like writing a diary, isn't it? It's like we might ask our students to write a learning diary. I think a blog is something very, very similar.
Yeah, no, I found it massively useful. I was speaking to Teresa, and she says that she uses it more to, when she goes to conferences, to put her notes there so that she can go back and find them and things like that. And some teachers, they use it as sort of a portfolio of their, the lessons that they've created, so that that publishers can notice that. I do it for just talking about my experiences. It helps me reflect on them and put them out there. And I suppose one of the things that I want one of my posts is to get now, I suppose, as a trainer, as an established trainer, is to break sort of this. It's almost like there's this barrier of, okay, here's the theory, and then once you're into that position, that's what you do. And I'm trying to break down that barrier of saying we're still sort of humans, still teachers, and we're still learning, still making mistakes. So I put up my reflections on there and saying, this was good, this was bad. So that's my purpose, I suppose, there.
You mentioned employment.
That's what I was getting to next.
Yeah, you mentioned employment. I mean, would you write a blog just for employment? It's quite a long way round to get a job. I mean, I'm not doing, it's quite a lot of work, because to get a job, you'd have to write a lot of blog posts to get noticed, wouldn't you? Yeah,
I mean, my question was going to be, as a manager, if you were looking to hire a teacher and they had a blog out there and they had their reflections on there, would that be something that you would take into consideration in the hiring process?
Right, you might do. If I was going to employ, maybe not just a teacher, but maybe if you were going to take on, because we occasionally take on a new teacher trainer, for example, and they said, but look at my blog. I think you would look at it and you would be interested to see what their perspective on things were. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't not take somebody because they didn't have a blog. No, that's too negative. So say you don't have a blog, don't worry. It's not going to stop you from getting a job. But if you have a blog and you said, oh, by the way, I've got this blog, I would read it and I'd be interested to read what you'd put. But be careful, because, if you've got a lot of spelling mistakes in it, or you know, if you don't write very well, or if you use a lot of exclamation marks, or if it doesn't look very nice, you could, you know, that might not be very good either.
I've been guilty of doing all of those things before. It's a you know, it's a process sometimes. And I think, oh God, did I write that? And then from a personal experience, I found it really beneficial for work. I mean, I only started, so I one of the reasons that I was sort of offered an interview to become a trainer for Cambridge University Press was because of the blog. Another was my conference work. So I mean, for me, it's helped me in well, that wasn't my purpose for it, but it was an effect. So like you said, probably not writing a blog for a job, but in terms of looking at the positives in the future, perhaps it will be beneficial.
Absolutely. So if somebody said to me, should I write a blog? I would say, well, yes, go for it. And it's not going to, you know, it's going to do you a lot more benefit. The benefits are incredible.
No, I completely agree. Well, I suppose we get to the advice. And you know, let's say you have a teacher who may have been teaching for a number of years. They're starting to feel quite confident. Maybe they've had a little bit of experience adapting their coursebook materials to their own context. And they're like, I think I want to take this a little bit further. Are there maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give this teacher?
Okay, so they're going to have to get noticed. So in our own school, what I've got, in fact, is a list of the 6 publishers, and I say to them, get onto the 6 websites and contact them. Send them your CV and say, I'm interested in work. That's what I would do anyway. You might not get any answers from anybody, but you might get somebody who suddenly it arrives just at the right moment and they say yes. Don't write to them and say, and I've got a great idea for a book, because they don't want your ideas. They've got their own ideas. Right. But certainly, you know, approach them. And all the websites, places like, you know, Oxford, Cambridge, have a button that says work for us. You just click on there and you just send them your CV. And if you've got a blog or if you've got a portfolio of material, amazing, because then they can immediately look at it. So that would be number 1. Number 2 is, once we can start going to conferences again, or even these online conferences, go and talk to the publishers. Just, you know, like they say in Spanish, you know, a bit of this, but you know, get in there and say, hey, you know, I really like these Cambridge books. You're not looking for a writer, are you? Or how can I get into writing? And probably my final piece of advice is, do things, even at the beginning, you might have to do some things for free. For example, you can write posts for various magazines. Things like, I work for International House. They have a journal, write for them, because people will notice it. Get in contact with different journals like, you know, ETP, Modern English Teacher. They might accept something you've written. So, I mean, I think the idea is just to get your name out there. That's 3. And number 4 that seems to be working really, really well at the moment is LinkedIn. I think that's picked up again. So get onto LinkedIn, post about what the materials you're creating. And I think someone like P. Clements would say, find the editors and write to them and say, oh, by the way, I'm a materials writer. Are you interested? Yeah,
brilliant. It seems like it's be proactive is the key here.
Yes. Don't, I mean, I had a teacher last week who said, well, I wrote one thing for a publisher, but they never got back to me. They don't. Editors are incredibly busy. You have to do it. Write to them. Don't wait for somebody to say, hey, would you like to do it? You've got to do the work. You've really got to get out there. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, be proactive, get out there then.
Yes.
No, I think that's an important thing. It's interesting because teacher training is a little bit different. I think teacher training, you need to be proactive in your development. For teacher training, I think you also need to be provided with an opportunity sometimes in your local context.
Yes.
and I don't know what's more difficult. Maybe sometimes that's quite difficult to achieve as well.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes, I mean, something interesting is publishers will often use you as a teacher trainer before they'll use you as a materials writer.
right. Yeah.
So in the old days, Macmillan used to have a lot of teachers' days. And they said to me one day, because I had somebody knew me from La Cunza and said, hey, we're giving a teacher's day in San Sebastian. Would you give a talk? And I gave a talk. And the next thing they said, oh, we liked your talk. Would you consider writing something for us?
Brilliant.
So I think that's another way in, sort of becoming a trainer for a publisher, and then they ask you, oh, and would you like to do some writing?
Yeah, brilliant, excellent. Yeah, especially at conferences as well. For example, I went to the IOTEFL pre-conference event for Training SIG, and I've been to a number of online conferences. They're not the same.
No.
I mean, they were good. The content was brilliant, but that networking thing, for example, I went to FITHEA a number of years ago in Madrid, or some of the ATHEA conferences when I was in Andalusia, and the sessions are amazing, but I find that one of the most beneficial things of going there is that networking aspect.
Yes,
and that seems to be really, really important for materials writers, and meeting face-to-face publishers seems to be quite important.
Yes, no, definitely getting your name known, yeah, if you can, I mean, if you're working in a school, get involved in choosing the materials for your school. That's quite an easy thing, probably. Find out if your director of studies would like some help. Say, oh, and can I meet the rep? And I mean, that's a way. And then you talk to the rep, and the rep says, oh, I like your advice. That's another way.
No, definitely, brilliant. Now, some of us obviously like reading, and I imagine there are many teachers out there that they're saying, okay, are there any books that I could read to gain more insights into materials writing, or to help me with my materials writing?
Yes.
Are there any recommendations that you have?
Yes, I've got a pile of books here.
Brilliant. Throw them at me.
I would say read is number one. So you've got to keep reading. So don't give up reading literature, newspapers, magazines. Just keep reading. Keep your eye out for quirky little things. Keep your eye when you're on the internet. I do this all the time. I'm reading The Guardian, and there's this really quirky story about somebody who's decided to grow, I don't know, a new type of apple that grows underground or something like that. Keep it, save it. You can probably use it for a text. These books are just amazing. Have you seen them?
Yeah.
These are the ELT Teacher to Writer books. This is exam materials, any of them. I think they've got about 24 of them. They're all amazing. They've got compendium ones now, so you can buy about 6 in one.
Yeah.
Kindle version, or you can buy them in paper versions. So that I would definitely buy. One of my heroes, and I wonder, have you spoken to John Hughes yet?
I have not, but he is on my list to contact.
Put him on your list. He's one of my heroes. So, and all of these books are amazing. The ETpedia books. So he's got one on materials writing. So definitely go for that one. He runs a course for Oxford University Continuing Development in Materials Writing.
I think that's running now. Yeah,
it's running now, and people say it's amazing. I just couldn't in July, but that's one. And then Rachel was talking about the one in Nile. I think that's meant to be really, really good as well.
Yeah.
So I think both of those. And apart from that, for your toolkit, I would say get yourself a very good grammar book with grammar exercises, because that's what you're going to need. So this is my go-to, Mr. Raymond Murphy. Not for the grammar explanations, because I've got another grammar book for that, but just to flip through and see, well, how does he do the grammar? What sort of different exercises are around? These books are brilliant for vocabulary. So when you're write all the English vocabulary in use, I've got all of those. These are good again, not for the actual words, but more how do they do the exercises? What are all the different types of exercises I could possibly do? And my final thing is get yourself a dictionary. And I would get a paper dictionary as well as an online dictionary. Online dictionaries are great, but I mean, this is just one I picked up. This is the Cambridge Learners Dictionary, which is cool
Really
because
good,
it's very, very simple English. Because the advanced dictionaries, I tend to write at lower levels. So get yourselves a paper dictionary, and I think you'd be all set.
Yeah, no, they're really, I mean, those titles there are amazing. Especially, yeah. I mean, the EOT Teachers to Writer series are phenomenally amazing and super. I mean, all the people that I know that write materials have recommended them. And in fact, I'm going to be interviewing someone from there very shortly, very soon. So I won't say too much more.
Okay. But I'm sure they'll tell you all about them. Yes.
But no, I can't recommend them enough. And I definitely put those in there for teachers. It seems like it's important to read to build that knowledge of the language and methodology as well. But it's also important to not reinvent the wheel almost. It seems like find something that people are doing that's successful and exploit that for your writing. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, in two areas. So for example, when you're going to write a text, my most successful texts are not where I begun as a journalist from zero. It's where I found an existing text and I've adapted it for a level or an age group or whatever. So that for me has worked a lot better. And then secondly, how many different grammar exercises are there? You know, it's I don't know. I think John Hughes lists 10 on his grammar page or something like that. But I think there are only so many different types of grammar exercises you can do. And not every grammar point lends itself to, I'll give you an example. Things like transformations, you know, the exercise in the Cambridge First, you have a sentence and a word and the student has to write the same sentence using that word.
Yeah.
You can't do it with relative clauses. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the sort of thing you learn. You just, you know, you go through your things like your Murphy and you see, how does he do it? What exercises work with what kind of language points? I think that saves you so much work than sitting down for 2 days trying to write transformations with who or the indefinite article, or because it just doesn't work.
Yeah. It just highlights how much work goes into writing these questions, these items, these things. And like you said, try not to reinvent the wheel with everything. There's certain things you learn and you just do what's successful, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, no, interesting. Well, Emma, it's been massively insightful. I have so many different areas now where I'm like, okay, I need to learn more about this. I need to learn more about that. I'm like, do I need to contact publishers now? And so many things to talk about. But you know, I won't keep you any longer. But I do want to say thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It has been really, really helpful and insightful. And I think that the teachers that are looking to experiment with materials writing are going to find this information useful, and I hope that they do.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, definitely. So again, thank you very much for your time, Emma, and I guess we'll see each other again soon, okay?
Yes, thanks ever so much, Jim. Okay, take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.